everybody. I have a fun little project today. I've got a little aspen bowl. I actually cored this out of a larger piece. I roughed it, I put it in the kiln, and you can see that it did not warp very much. It's actually running quite true here, considering that it was rough turned. I'm going to clean up the tenon and then get ready to turn it around and put it in the chuck to finish turn it. I'm going to rough the outside shape, just scraping with my bowl gouge. Very carefully trying to flatten that rim out a little bit to get it to run as true as I can before I do a finish cut on the outside. And now I'm going to cut backwards or uphill or without the supported grain for a little while. Little bit of profile refining with a scraper. And then I'm going to come back with my bowl gouge and do some shear scraping for the final surface prep. I'm going to leave the bottom a little thicker than I normally would because I'm going to pour resin in here and I don't want it to seep all the way through. You would not think it would be so hard to get a flat bottom in a bowl. It's just crazy making. I've started using this little inertia sander on the back side of some of the bowls because I can get it up closer to the chuck. I was using it yesterday and I don't know, apparently the bearing needs some grease or something because I smelled something really hot. And I'm like, oh God, what's on fire? I think it was just the heat from that thing spinning so fast for so long. The finishing process is going to be the same, except that I'm not going to put any finish on the inside of the bowl. I went ahead and used the denatured alcohol and the 3-pound cut of shellac because I still haven't made another bottle of 1-pound cut. But I'm not going to put any of the sanding pastes or the finishing wax on the bottom of the bowl where the resin is going to go. I think that it wouldn't stick to it. So on the inside, I'm just doing the rim and then maybe a 1/2 inch down into the bowl. I started with the Axe abrasive sanding paste, and then I'm going to do the Brad's abrasive sanding paste. And for the top coat on this one, I'm going to use Brad's tongue wax. I let that soak in for a couple of hours and then came back and buffed it off. Ooh, I got that sitting nice and true on that jam chalk. It's not quite concave enough to sit flat yet. As soon as I get the bottom finished up here, I'm going to take it off the lathe, take the nub off, and then finish the bottom. Once that's done, I'm going to pour some resin tinted with a little bit of blue alcohol ink into the bowl and let it cure. In the meantime, we'll move on to the second part of this project. I've been doing some kind of woodworking for about 20 years now. I started out doing small pieces of furniture, home decor items, candle holders, and mirrors and things like that. I did custom picture framing and other small things. I had a pretty small shop at the time. It was in the basement in the house that we lived in Ann Arbor. Actually, now that I think about it, one of the first projects that I ever did was to build new doors for the kitchen cabinets. They literally were just plywood slabs with hinges and handles. So we took those down and I built mission-style doors. I used a tongue and groove router bit and cabinet-grade poplar and birch plywood. We painted them white and they looked really good. It was probably kind of an ambitious project for one of the first things that I ever did, but that seems to just be how I roll. Anyway, I moved on from that stuff to doing bandsaw boxes, and then once I started getting into that, I started doing original designs, and then I started carving them. And I thought that carving was really a lot of fun. That was my favorite part about making the bandsaw boxes. So I decided to skip the whole bandsaw box part and just learn how to carve. So I signed up for a class with a master woodcarver out in California. It was really a great experience. It was a weekend workshop. There were only 4 of us in the class, and we had both Ron and his apprentice at the time, so we had lots of really good hands-on instruction. The design that we did for that class was also perhaps a little bit ambitious for a weekend, and we weren't able to finish it. Some of you guys have commented on that piece because I leaned it up against my work table during one of my shop reorganizations, and there it still is, probably 2 years later. I'm really good at working around things. Anyway, that class was a power carving class, and that's ultimately how I started with what I've got going on here, which is going to be a very stylized little wren. I started with a piece of kiln-dried walnut. It's probably 3/4 to maybe an inch thick. I cut the overall shape out on the bandsaw, and then I used a flexible shaft tool and some carbide bits to do the bulk of the roughing. It's a slightly different design, but you can see in these pictures the basic progression of steps through, starting with a flat piece of wood and then ending up with something that's three-dimensional. I'm not a great carver, but one of the things that I do know is that you really don't want any flat spots. So the work that I'm doing right now is really just sort of the finishing work, and I'm trying to make sure that there aren't any flat spots left from, the top of the board. And then also that it's symmetrical. So you'll see me stop and hold it up and look at it from a distance to see if both sides are even. And for this part, I've just been using my flex cut knife. Now that I've gotten all of the extra material removed, I've got a carbide burr in my Dremel, and I don't remember if that's a Kutzall brand or a Sabertooth. I have both, and they both work great. But what I'm doing here is I'm just basically using this burr to sand with, to smooth the surface out and get rid of the knife marks so that when I actually go to sand it, I don't have to work so hard. You generally want more support when you're carving. One of your hands should be braced someplace, and then that way you don't slip and stab yourself or cut yourself with the carbide tool. But as you can see, it's hard to hold on to. I had trouble when I was actually carving it. I was either stabbing myself in the gut with the beak or trying not to break the tail off. It's a little bit cumbersome, so I'm just doing the best I can. I'm holding on tight to the bird, and I'm taking really light passes with the burr and gonna just get it all relatively smooth before I go to sand it. I end up spending a little bit more time on the tip of the tail than on any of the other part of the bird because I couldn't quite get it to cut cleanly with the knife. I didn't have enough leverage, and I was afraid that I was going to snap the tail off, so I figured I would just go ahead and, take my time and nibble away at it until I got the shape that I wanted. Fortunately for me, I have a box of unfinished carving projects, and I had a couple of more little wrens roughed out. So I grabbed another one and I went back at it, and I didn't break the tail off of this one. I think that it's safe to say that sanding pretty much sucks no matter what kind of woodworking you're doing. It was certainly the worst part about the bandsaw boxes. In fact, they shouldn't call them bandsaw boxes because that part takes about 5 minutes. They should call them sanding boxes because that part takes about 5 days. Anyway, when I started turning, that was one of the most exciting things, is that you could sand on the lathe, which was just lovely. I don't have a drill chuck that has a Morse taper with a threaded end, so I can't use it in the headstock of the lathe, or it will just come out once it starts spinning. But I do have a set of collet chucks that I can use with a drawbar. Collet chucks? Drawbar? Let's start with the collet chucks. This is a collet chuck. The Morse taper end is threaded so that the rod threads into it. This end comes in different diameters, and then you chuck whatever you're going to chuck into it. So here's your drawbar. This slides through your headstock, and once it's through, you screw the collet onto the end of the threaded rod. Pull it back into the headstock to seat it into the Morse taper, and then tighten your handle. That not only tightens the collet around whatever you're chucking, it also makes sure that it can't slip out of the Morse taper. I love wrens. I think they're one of my favorite birds. And I'm pretty happy with the way this came out, especially since it's kind of the prototype. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button for me and leave me a comment and let me know what you guys think. Until next time, which I'm hoping won't be so long, y'all be safe out there. I carried a watermelon.